Hello and welcome to a Premier League Game Week 12 preview. Thank you all for joining. Before I get into the live stream, if I could just make sure everything's working okay, and then I will get underway. Everything working alright, guys? Okay, I think everything is all good, so we will start off. Welcome to another live stream. Thank you all for joining. I hope you're all doing good. Thank you, Jahed, for confirming. We returned to Premier League action after a busy international break. Luckily for us, though, that was the last break for a while. So I think the next one is in March. So we've got sort of block period of domestic action to get stuck into. It's worth noting, though, around this time of the sort of calendar, fixtures can get a bit difficult to navigate. It is a sort of very packed schedule. We get a bit of rotation. Obviously, we've seen a few managerial changes, so things to consider. But we have to just be as wary as possible of these changes. It's worth noting also that these sort of injuries and changes can provide an edge to take advantage of because books can be a bit slow to adjust to them. So we'll sort of look into those as the live stream goes on, see how we can take advantage of some of these changes. But thank you all for tuning in live. I hope you're all doing well. If you are here live, I would like to encourage you to leave your bets in the comment section, or if you're watching as a video, leave them afterwards, and I'll happily go through them. So, without wasting any more time, the first game to cover is Leicester against Chelsea. It's the 12:30 kickoff on Saturday at the King Power. After drawing to Arsenal just before the break, Chelsea find themselves in third, despite registering just one win in their last five. They have had a tough run of fixtures to navigate against Forest, Liverpool, Newcastle, Man United and Arsenal, so they'll probably be looking forward to this one against Leicester a bit. Bit of something to sort of consider for this one is that it'll be Leicester, who were formerly managed by the Chelsea manager Enzo Maresca last season. So a bit of history between the two sides. They were beaten 3-0 by Man United just before the break, and they find themselves in 15th, just 3 points clear of the drop zone. In terms of the injury report, we have got quite a few things to consider here because Jordan Ayew and Fatawu were injured on international duty. Fatawu has been ruled out for the season, which is a big blow for Leicester, but also from a betting perspective because sort of backing opposition tackles and fouls against him was a sort of lock every single week. But he will be out for this game. Jordan Ayew picked up an injury to his knee on international duty, but it has not been deemed to be serious, so he is in contention to start here. I'd probably lean towards he misses out though. Daka is also past fit, so could make his first start of the season. And Jamie Vardy is also sort of nearing a return. He did train midweek, so could be in line to start, although he is not fully fit, as Steve Cooper mentioned in his press conference. For Chelsea, Reece James was the only player declared as injured by Enzo Maresca, meaning players who missed out during the international break, so Gusto, Palmer, Sancho, Wesley Fofana, they should all be available. I think this game is a bit of a tough one to call based on the sort of uncertainty surrounding injuries, particularly for Leicester. I think in general Leicester are quite a difficult team to bet on, but the main sort of angle of interest for them is usually drawing fouls because their sort of attacking trio of Jordan Ayew, Buonanotte, Fatawu and Mavididi, they're all very good players to target for duels. But again, it's sort of uncertain to say which of those three start. So for this one, I'm going to assume Buonanotte starts and Mavididi starts at least. There's been no indication that those two are injured. and those two players are very, very good for drawing fouls and duels, which I'll talk about a bit more. Um, Based on that, I think they draw a great matchup against Moises Caicedo in the Chelsea midfield. And my first angle is for Caicedo to register 2 or more fouls, which is priced at 1.9 with Bet365. If we look into his foul data this season, we can see he's averaging exactly 2.0 fouls per game in the league. He's averaging exactly 2.0 fouls in the league. But he's notably landed this selection in each of his last 6. So if we just filter to Premier League games, which is what he generally plays, we can see he started the season a bit slow. Obviously failing to register a foul against Wolves away, but that game was 6-2. And he's landed this selection each of the last 6, with 3 or more fouls in 3 of those games as well. So he's clearly a good target for fouls. He's clearly trusted by Enzo Maresca because he's played the full 90 in almost every game this season, only failing against Wolves. And 90 minutes against the likes of Man Utd, Buonanotte, a good matchup. I think he's certainly a player to target. An alternative angle would be to go for Fofana and Caicedo as a foul double. And that comes out at 1.8 with 365. And when you consider that, that's landed in 10 out of 11 games for Caicedo and 9 out of 10 games for Fofana. It looks a really nice price considering both will have a good matchup as well. Fofana as well, I think is a good player to target. He's already had 6 yellows in this season, so that's sort of a testament to how aggressive he plays as a centre-back. And he's also had a very, very secure sort of minutes floor. He's only missed a full 90 in 1 game. So I think those two are sort of players to target for Jules, for Chelsea in this one. Now, the next sort of angle is based on Fatu being injured and how we can sort of exploit that, what opportunity is presented by that absentee. And I think we see Mavididi start on the left. I think he's a sort of natural replacement. Those two players are quite similar in the sense that they're very direct, they're very good on the ball, and they see a lot of the ball. If we look into how the two compare in terms of their sort of dispossessed stats, we can see Mavididi actually ranks top for Leicester over the last 30 games. Fatu is quite a bit lower, but he's also, I would say Fatu is the better dribbler. So an interesting fact about Fatu is he's played just 6.4 90s this season, but he's actually registered the most take-ons. And I had written a section up on him before this, before I realised he had done his ACL in, and his stats are ridiculous. He's averaging over 10 attempted take-ons per game. And if we look into sort of how Dalot dealt with him in the last game before the international break, I think Dalot had something like 3 tackles, 6 dribbled passes, 3 fouls, so really heavily involved. And Mavididi is a similar type of player in that sense. He'll sort of demand a lot of the ball, he'll be quite direct in his approach, and therefore, as a sort of lean, I would be thinking of his matchup with Malo Gusto. With Reece James out as well, you would imagine Gusto sort of sees the full 90, hasn't really got a natural replacement for him. And we can actually look into last season. There's a bit of history between these two because Mavididi faced off against Gusto on the left wing in the FA Cup last season. In that game, Gusto made 5 tackles and he was dribbled past 3 times. So 5 out of 8 tackles, he was kept very busy, didn't make a foul notably. So I have got my eye on his tackle prices with 365. He's currently priced at 2.5 to make over 2.5 tackles, which I think is actually a really nice price. Again, especially if he has to get 90 minutes against Mavididi on the wing, would be ideal. So that will be all for the early kickoff. Again, it is an early kickoff, so generally a bit more difficult to navigate, and I don't think it's sort of an ideal matchup to target. But moving on, we have got Man City against Spurs, second televised game on Saturday. It's at the Etihad, and I think it's the biggest game of the weekend. The break for City came at an ideal time. They were obviously on a stretch of 4 games, 4 consecutive losses. That actually started against Spurs in the EFL Cup, 2-1 loss at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But they've had some time to sort of row over their mistakes. I think a 2-week break was absolutely essential for them. In terms of their injury report, it's obviously still quite large, but they have had some key players returning, which is a boost for them. So De Bruyne obviously featured off the bench against Brighton, and he has trained, so I would imagine he starts whenever he can. Foden, Grealish, Akanji and Stones also returned to training after the international break, which is a very big boost for Pep Guardiola. For Spurs, they were beaten just before the break as well. They lost 2-1 to Ipswich at home, which was their 5th league loss in the season. So Spurs sit in 10th, which is underperforming compared to where they were last season at this point. In terms of their injury report, Van de Ven and Romero are both doubtful at the time of recording, so still waiting for information from the press conference, but their sort of availability of those two will be quite big news. Bentancur is also suspended, which means Bissouma should be able to get a start, while Richarlison and Werner are both doubtful on the left wing. Based on that sort of latter information, the first angle for me would be for Son to register a shot on target. And I'll also talk about Brennan Johnson and his price as well. These sides obviously met not too long ago in the EFL Cup, so we can learn sort of a bit about how either team might approach this game. Notably though, Man City did rotate quite a lot in that game, but they did have the majority of possession, 68%, so they sort of played in their regular style. They were just not as effective as they would normally be, so we saw no Haaland, no De Bruyne, for example. But from a Spurs point of view, whenever they play these kind of games where the game will be more transitional, where they will exert less dominance on their opposition, where they have to play more vertical, they're less settled, we see Dominic Solanke operate as more of a facilitator in sort of a Roberto Firmino-esque role. We saw it against City in the EFL Cup, we saw it against Brighton earlier in the season, and if we look into those games, Solanke actually had 0 shots against Brighton and just 1 shot against City, so we can see he's not really the primary focus of attacks. Playing as a facilitator, what he does is he drops deeper and he aims to create chances for the wide players. In this case, it should be Son and Brennan Johnson. So if we look into that game against City, Werner had 4 shots, 2 on target and a goal before being subbed after 70 minutes, and he also had a lot of good chances in that game. And I think if you are to give Son those chances, we could see 2 or even 3 goals. Brennan Johnson similarly had 2 shots, both of which were on target, and he again also played only 70 minutes. In the game against Brighton, Brennan Johnson had 3 shots, 1 on target, which was a goal, while Werner had 2 shots, neither of which were on target. So, assuming Son reclaims his position on the left wing, it should be sort of him and Brennan Johnson that see the best chances for Spurs based on how they should play on the break. So naturally, my sort of attention gravitates towards their shot on target prices. They are both nicely priced with Bet365. Son is 1.9, Brennan Johnson is 2.0, and I think both are a good target. If I had to choose one, I'd probably lean towards Son. The reason being, he obviously recently returned from injury, but he did play that full 90 against Ipswich last time out, so he seems to be at sort of full fitness levels. I would say he has the more secure minutes floor over Brennan Johnson, and he also has a fantastic record against City. He's landed a shot on target in each of the last 6 head-to-head games. So I'd personally be leaning towards Son as the better value shout, but I do also really like Brennan Johnson at evens, obviously the bigger price. I'm going to move over to the opposition now and actually focus on Haaland shot on target. It's a strange price, this one, because it is a buy low spot for City at the moment. Obviously they're in a sort of poor run of form, but when they are in these kind of forms, we see prices inflate a bit, and we saw that against Brighton when Haaland was priced at 1.8 to score any time, which we took advantage of. Now his anytime goal scorer price is shortened to 1.66, so a bit too short to back, but his shots on target price has stayed relatively similar, so he's still 1.8 to register 2 or more shots on target. And I think when you get a line like this, it's going to be so rare across the course of the season, and I just think you have to take advantage of it. It's priced at 1.8 despite landing in 13 out of 16 in all competitions this season. He draws a good matchup against Spurs, who are potentially without Romero, and Van de Ven. I think Van de Ven is more likely to miss this game. So obviously Haaland should be looking forward to this one. And again, I just think it's one of those where you have to take it. It's Haaland. He's gonna find chances, and he's generally quite efficient with them. Obviously, City have been in a poor run of form, but I think it's an overreaction by having his price this high. In addition to that, De Bruyne was obviously in training, and he did feature off the bench against Brighton just before the break, so he's had enough time to build up his fitness, and because of that, I would imagine De Bruyne starts. Now, as a sort of additional layer of research, if we look into Haaland's output when De Bruyne started at the start of the season, we can see first league game Haaland 1 goal, second he scored a hat-trick, third game he scores a hat-trick, and then a brace against Brentford. So he's clearly a much better striker when De Bruyne plays. I think it makes sense. He is the primary focus. De Bruyne is obviously one of the best creators in world football. So if De Bruyne does start, really like this price and can definitely see the potential to ladder it. Next angle is in regards to City fouls. So I'm targeting a player who started in the last 6 games for City, and that is Matheus Nunes. In starts this season, he's made a foul in 7 out of 8, and he's found some success without sort of Doku and Grealish. He's strung together a sort of more consistent run of games, which has been rare in his City career so far. And his foul prices are decent. He's priced at 1.73 to commit a foul with Paddy Power. Notably though, his only miss was against Spurs in the EFL Cup, which I'll talk about a bit more now. In that game, he was matched up against Archie Gray, who started at right back. Archie Gray has drawn a foul in just 2 out of 6 starts as a Spurs player. So obviously not a good player to target as a matchup. However, Pedro Porro will likely get the start here. He's obviously the regular right back, and he's drawn a foul in 10 out of 13 starts this season in all competitions. So a much better matchup for Matheus Nunes. And especially if City are to dominate the game, as they should with a stronger team at home, you'd imagine sort of Porro in this situation can have a tendency to buy soft fouls, and I think he's a good matchup for Matheus Nunes. If we look into how Nunes played last game against Veltman, obviously we targeted that matchup, and Nunes made 5 fouls out of 10 City fouls in total, so contribute a lot. I think Porro can play a similar role as Veltman in that one. He can be quite a frustrating opponent to play against, and he sees quite a lot of the ball because sees quite a lot of the ball going forward as well. So he's a good player to target to draw a foul. He's actually priced at 1.73 to draw a foul as well, which looks quite good as a single. But my sort of angle of interest is to double the two. So go Nunes foul, Porro to draw a foul, which comes out at 2.68 with Paddy Power, which is pretty big. And we are covered by the super sub rule in case any of them get injured. However, it's worth noting that obviously I mentioned Grealish did train, so he could be in line to start, as Pep Guardiola looks to sort of shake things up a bit following such a poor run of form. If it is Grealish who starts, Porro fouls will probably be the sort of angle of interest for this game. So that's 3 or 4 angles. I think it is a game to be wary of, but it is one of the better games of the weekend to bet on, I would say. So that will conclude the Saturday games. Moving on to Sunday, we have Southampton against Liverpool, 2 p.m. kickoff at St Mary's. Southampton sit bottom of the league, but they did recently get their first win in the top flight by beating Everton. They followed that up with a 2-0 loss at Molineux. Liverpool, however, were able to extend their winning run by beating Villa just prior to the break. So they currently sit top of the Premier League, top of the Champions League, and they are the informed team at the moment. I think the break for them came at a bad time. Obviously, they would have liked to continue their momentum, but let's see if that sort of 2-week hiatus has had any impact on them. For the injury report, Southampton will be without Bednarek, who was injured on international duty, and Ramsdale, who fractured his finger just before the break. So 2 key defensive absentees, and it means we will get third choice keeper Alex McCarthy in the Southampton net. The main news for Liverpool is surrounding Trent. Obviously, he went off before half time, just before the break. I would imagine he sits this one out. There hasn't been too much information in regards to that injury. But Slot does have a capable replacement in Conor Bradley, so I don't really see the need to rush Trent back, given how well Bradley has shown himself to be over the last season or so. So Jota and Alisson are also out, but both are nearing a return. So not too much injury news to cover for these two teams. But I do think this game is a bit of a banana skin. Not many angles sort of scream out at first glance. But there is one particular matchup that I am especially looking forward to. And it's between Luis Diaz and Kyle Walker-Peters. Kyle Walker-Peters obviously hasn't been a secure starter under Russell Martin so far. He started off playing on the left before being excluded from the lineup, and now he's sort of found a more stable position on the right back spot, starting the last 5 league games, playing the full 90 in all of them. If we look into his sort of fouls drawn data in the Premier League, it does stand out quite a bit. He's drawn 2 or more fouls in 6 out of 9 games, and he's drawn a foul in every single game. So he's clearly a good player to target for drawing fouls, and he'll be up against Luis Diaz, who's actually registered the most fouls for Liverpool in this season. He's actually hit 2 or more fouls in each of his last 5 starts, and he's hit 3 or more fouls in 4 of those 5. So clearly a good player to target. If we look into those games, he's had 3 fouls against Bologna, 5 fouls against Arsenal, 2 against Brighton in the EFL Cup, 5 against Leverkusen, 3 against Villa. So he's often clearing this line pretty easily, and he has seen the full 90 in each of his 3 last starts. So that's a good sign as well. He's sort of seen an uptick in minutes without Jota, which is a benefit for this matchup. Southampton are actually a good side to target for opposition fouls. I think that's where the angle of interest is for me, is for Southampton to draw fouls in this one, and it's because they play possession-based football. Since their promotion, they're averaging 13.55 fouls drawn per game, which is pretty decent. And as I say, Kyle Walker-Peters has been a contributor to that tally, especially without Flynn Downs. He does see quite a lot of the ball, which obviously helps this selection. So I like those two. In addition, a sort of additional thing to consider is that Tyler Dibbling is the only player who has drawn more fouls than Kyle Walker-Peters this season for Southampton. Obviously, his minutes are not as secure, but he does play on the right wing. So if we sort of see Kyle Walker-Peters, Dibbling both start, they should find duels against Luis Diaz, which is one to target, a sort of matchup to target. So based off all that information, I think my best angle would be for Luis Diaz to make 2 or more fouls, combined with Kyle Walker-Peters to draw 1 or more fouls, which comes out at top price with Sky at 2.63, which is actually a lot bigger than I would have thought. It's quite a decent bit shorter on Paddy. And you can actually also get Kyle Walker-Peters to make 2 or more fouls, or to draw 2 or more fouls, at the same price, 2.63, which looks very big as a single with Sky. An alternative angle is in the shots market, and it's to do with Harwood Bellis. So I targeted him for a foul earlier in the season, but he's adapted well, and I think his now his sort of angle of interest is to register a shot. He's currently priced at 1.91 with Paddy, and he's proven himself to be a solid aerial threat. He actually scored for England at the international break, and he's managed a shot in 6 of his last 7 games, with 2 or more in 3 of those as well. So he's a good player in the air. The sort of thing to consider is that obviously the data looks good, but backing centre-back shots is always quite a risky option in my opinion. Reason being is their distance from goal is obviously the greatest, so you are reliant on a specific situation, a set piece. Now the question is, will Southampton get many of those against Liverpool? Potentially, but it will likely to be lower than their average. So Liverpool rank 15th for opposition corners. However, their defensive metrics aren't great. despite having the likes of Van Dijk and Konate. They actually rank 13th for shots allowed from set pieces per game, 3.55, and have an opposition shot percentage of 3.22%. Only Spurs actually have higher, meaning a high proportion of the opposition set pieces are actually resulting in a shot against Liverpool, which is something to consider. I think 1.91, you'd look to boost that over evens by sort of adding Southampton corners, and if Liverpool can take the lead early, Southampton will probably keep the ball for quite long. But it is a bit of a mismatch. I think Liverpool are very, very heavy favourites for this one, especially given that Southampton will be without key players defensively. So that angle isn't yet a lock. I think that needs a bit more analysis. Moving on, we have Ipswich against Man United, 4:30 televised kickoff on Sunday at Portman Road. Ipswich were able to climb out of the drop zone by beating Spurs right before the break. That was their first win of the season. The key sort of aspect to consider for this game is that it will be Ruben Amorim's first game in charge of Man United. He'll be taking charge of Man United team sitting in 13th, although they did have a bit of a resurgence under Ruud van Nistelrooy, having beaten Leicester and drawing to Chelsea. Because of this sort of unknown in that regard, it is a bit of a banana skin fixture, in my opinion. But we can also sort of gain a bit of an edge by taking advantage of the uncertainty. So I've had a read of a couple of TFA articles last night to gain a better understanding of how Amorim might change the setup at United and how we can sort of utilize that. So if we look into a typical Sporting lineup under Amorim, we can see it's quite different to how United would normally set up. So if we look how they set up against Chelsea, against Man City in the Champions League, you can see they played 3 at the back, wing backs, and a front 3 with 2 sort of inside forwards. In that game against City, they played very, very vertical, which was sort of catalysed by wing backs who were very, very willing to get forward and attack. Man United historically have never really played anything other than a sort of 4 at the back, so I think asking them to change so radically straight away, not sure if that's completely realistic. But we can sort of see, I can definitely imagine certain players for Man United fitting into this sort of system. So if we think of Diomande as the centre back, as a sort of physical presence in that back line, we can see sort of De Ligt or even Harry Maguire playing that role. He's sort of flanked by 2 better ball playing centre backs, so that would be Alessandro Martinez, for example, who could fit in there nicely as one of those 2. In the double pivot, I think the most natural player there would be Manuel Ugarte, and he is a player to talk about a bit more for this because he played under Amorim for 2 seasons, in the 2021 season to 22 and 22 to 23, before earning his move to PSG. So Amorim certainly knows how to get the best out of him. And if we look into his data under Amorim in those 2 seasons, we can see, if we look into his fouls, in his first season he's had 34 fouls in 12.3 90s, so that's averaging 2.7 fouls per 90, which is very, very high. Also consider that Sporting finished second in that campaign. And then in a more complete season, when he was just 21, Ugarte had 64 fouls in 26.1 90s, so 2.4 fouls per 90. So very, very high numbers for a centre midfielder in a high-performing team. So we can see Sporting finish second and then fourth. So that is something to note. But also his fouled numbers, he's averaging over or around two fouls drawn per game. So he was heavily involved in midfield. And I think he might be given a bigger role this season under Amorim, or for the rest of the season. So he's one to keep an eye on. If we look into his foul prices, he's a bit short. He's priced at 1.62 with both Sky and Paddy to commit 2 or more fouls. But To sort of boost that, you can look to double that with Hutchinson to draw a foul, or even Liam Delap to sort of get that around backable. So that's the first thing to consider. I think Amorim will give Ugarte a big role. Next up, we can see that Sporting typically played with inside forwards. So we have Trincao and Pedro Goncalves. And it's a bit more difficult to consider who fits into those roles. So what I read was a lineup with Højlund and Xerxes is not impossible. Could see Xerxes in that sort of role just behind the main striker, which is obviously a bit more natural to him, given that he's not really an out-and-out number 9. But I would imagine the other sort of inside forward would be Bruno. I think he makes the most sense. And in a more sort of advanced role, I think he's one to target again for goal involvement. So looking into his data so far this season, he's registered just 2 goals and 3 assists in 11 games. But he has seen a notable uptick since Ten Hag was sacked. So he's actually registered 6 goals and assists in those 4 games under Ruud van Nistelrooy, landing a goal or assist in all 4 of those games. And if he is to sort of play as an inside forward, you imagine he'll still be on set pieces, he'll be on penalties, and he'll be up against an Ipswich side who have conceded the highest XG total in the league so far. So an ideal matchup here. And that brings me on to a second angle, which would be Bruno to score or assist, which is priced at 1.91 with Paddy. I think that's actually a really big price considering the matchup, considering that he's landed this in each of his last 4 games. And he has been due some regression. He's actually registered the highest XG in the league for Man United with 4, scoring just 2 goals from that. And he's also registered the most expected assisted goals as well. So he's been the sort of main man for United so far, even despite his sort of lack of output up until this point. But he is due, as I say, he is due some regression. So that would be the second angle. Ugarte will be the first angle with backing him to make fouls. But I think it's the first game for Amorim, so we can't say for certain whether he will go for his new system. We can't say for certain which players will play in the system. We might see Bruno in a deeper role, in which case we don't really want to be backing his sort of goal involvement markets. But I would imagine it's best to watch and sort of analyse this game and then use that information going forward. I think for the first game, it's always difficult, especially when Amorim is expected to make such drastic changes. So as I say, I'll be covering this game in potentially a bit more detail as a Twitter thread. So make sure you're following me on that platform if you're not already. That will conclude all the Sunday games, so that's the weekend finished. But we do have Monday Night Football, Newcastle against West Ham, 8 PM at St James's Park. It's the final game of the game week. Newcastle were able to break out of a rut of form just before the break by registering back-to-back wins against Nottingham Forest and Arsenal, so 2 tough fixtures, and that puts them in 8th position. West Ham, however, under Lopetegui have continued to falter, having played out a 0-0 draw with Everton most recently. There was very few chances created in that game, which sort of summarised West Ham so far this season. They've just been very flat, lacking balance, lacking consistency. Another thing that makes them quite difficult to bet on has been their lack of a steady lineup. Sort of player minutes hasn't been consistent, so they've been a bit of a tough team to navigate so far. They will have Kudus suspended for this game, but there isn't too much information on the sort of injury reports yet. So again, being on a Monday, still got quite some time to consider information, but we'll go off what we know for now. A trend that marries up nicely for this game is actually that West Ham ranks 2nd in the league for most fouls, and Newcastle have drawn the most fouls in the league. So we're sort of expecting Newcastle to draw quite a few fouls in this one, and West Ham to make quite a few fouls. So a chief contributor to West Ham's foul count so far has been Edson Alvarez. So he's averaging 2.12 fouls over the last 30 games, If we look into this season, he's seen quite a decent uptick under Lopetegui. And he's also already seen 2 red cards. So he was sent off for 2 bookable offences against Liverpool, and he was sent off for 2 bookable offences most recently against Nottingham Forest. So he's a player who is sort of yet to fully adapt. He hasn't been in great form, and his minutes will probably be limited in this game because of that. Paqueta has also been a good player to target. So far, he's played in a sort of more deeper midfield role than he did under David Moyes, and because of that, he's been given a bit more defensive responsibility. So he's averaging 2.16 fouls per 90 this season. But as I say, the minutes aren't really secure for either of the 2 players. So they're a tough team to bet on, really. The next sort of matchup to target would potentially be Emerson against Anthony Gordon. Gordon was obviously substituted just before the international break against Forest with an apparent injury, but he did play for England during the international break. So I would imagine we see a familiar Newcastle lineup with Joe Linton on the left, Gordon on the right, and Willock in midfield. Tonali on the bench, Isak up front. The Italian has quite impressive tackle data. He's averaging 3.19 tackles per 90, along with 1.2 fouls per 90. So again, was an ideal matchup against the likes of Anthony Gordon, who will also be supported by Livramento. But I think he's one to target. Newcastle at home are obviously a good team to back. They generally play a lot better at home, especially sort of evening games under the lights. I think they'll dominate West Ham in this game. I think they've been in good form, whereas West Ham just simply haven't. So I do think West Ham will have a fair amount of defensive work to do, and Emerson is a player to target, especially if he has to draw the matchup of Anthony Gordon. But as I say, it is still very early to be taking bets on this game. There's still quite a lot of information to consider in terms of the injury report. And because of that, what I'll be doing is posting a sort of more detailed thread on this game closer to the time, probably on Sunday. So make sure you are following me on there if you're not already. But other than that, that will be all of the games for today. Sorry, I didn't have the chat open. Gusto 1 shot and foul is a good price. I haven't had a look at Gusto's shot prices, but yeah, I can imagine that being a good price. I think against Leicester it's a good matchup, especially given that Leicester generally play quite a deep block. So you'd imagine Gusto will have sort of freedom to get forward. And yeah, as I say, like his foul prices. So if we can get that sort of above evens, I definitely see the value in that. And especially without Reece James, you would imagine his sort of minutes floor is safe. Barring sort of any injury, 90 minutes should be in order for him. So yeah, really like that one. Thanks for the comment, Kai. But yeah, that will be all. That's all the games covered. Thank you very much for your support on the stream. Remember to stay tuned on Twitter. I'll be posting sort of full write-ups there, and we'll have my staking plan on the Telegram channel. So once again, thank you for supporting. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next Thursday. Goodbye.